Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to the participants of our webinar today. Welcome to our fourth webinar series. And I'm glad to tell that it's already the fourth time that we organize very insightful discussions with leading experts in the field. And I think I can call many of you already friends, because many of you already joined our webinar series. And for those who joined us for the first time, welcome to the Amsterdam Center of Transfer Pricing and Income Allocation. As usual, we'll have 3 webinars in the series hosted by research fellows of the Amsterdam Center for Transfer Pricing and Income Allocation, which is part of the University of Amsterdam, and also with invited guest speakers and leaders of thoughts in their field. So today's session is with Vladimir Starkov. He is Managing Director at NERA Economic Consulting, and he is based in the United States in Chicago. Let me introduce you in a bit more detail. Dr. Vladimir Starkov is an economist and a testifying expert specializing in transfer pricing and business valuation. His experience encompasses a variety of industries, including agri-science, life science, automotive, banking, biotechnology, pharmaceutical, consumer electronics, and others. Dr. Starkov holds also a PhD in economics from West Virginia University, and he has participated in engagements involving various tax controversy proceedings, including tax audits conducted by the federal, state, and foreign tax authorities, negotiations, and implementations of different documents, APAs, map requests, everything in North America, Asia, and Europe. So welcome to our guest expert today.
Well, thank you very much, Svitlana, for the invitation. It's really an honor for me to be a part of University of Amsterdam Transfer Pricing Center series. Yes, the topic of the profit split is really near and dear to my heart. Thank you for this as well.
In this webinar, we will discuss complexities of applying the profit split method. This is the first webinar in the series. As I mentioned, there will be 2 more, and please stay tuned and follow our updates. So the June webinar will be chaired by Rezan Oktan and Federico Lobianco, and will deal with the particularities of applying the profit split method in the financial industry, and also with a specific focus on insurance industry. And July webinar chaired by Richard Kohler will discuss the changes and factors driving the change in the use of the profit split method. So all the updates with the details of those webinars and other events will be available on the website, LinkedIn page, and also shared via our newsletters with you. So let's not wait any other minute. And Vladimir, I'll give you the floor and would like to ask you, please tell us whether the profit split method, when is it applied in practice, and whether it is applied recently more often than before? What differences potentially in the preferences of applying the profit split method you observe in Americas, Europe, and Asia?
Right, very good. So I just switched to my presentation slide deck here, but yes, I also would like to encourage you to ask the questions, either written or live. This material is designed more to be as a masterclass and not a basic overview of the profit split. We will get into some exciting areas very soon, such as the value chain analysis or synergies, the areas that are mentioned in transfer pricing guidelines, but there's little guidance provided about their application. And so, yes, to address Svitlana's question about is there more use of the profit split in recent years? So, well, let me step back and just say that in transfer pricing field, just probably as in any other professional field, there are some words of wisdom that get passed around, and there is one that stuck with me in particular with this respect. It's that every transaction is really a profit split. The only question is how do you allocate the profits to each party. So, and I see that in recent years in particular, tax authorities as well as the taxpayers starting to think more alongside those terms, which is good in a way. So they consider more what I would call the value chain, thinking about where the residual profits belong. So it's less about the bilateral situation and which party should we benchmark, but it's more about what each party contributes. We definitely see these ways of thinking on the side of the tax authorities, for example, as well as on the side of the taxpayers. So the tax authorities these days may propose reallocation of the residual profit from one side to the other. That happens in, for example, cases of exit taxation or cases when the local value contributions are claimed in temp situations and so on. But there are also sort of what I would call cooperative proceedings between the taxpayers and the tax authorities, such as the advanced pricing agreements or APAs. And in those proceedings, the application of the profit split method tends to be the most principled. Those are some of the most interesting cases I had a chance to see firsthand. So, and I guess maybe without the further ado, we will jump to sort of the beginning of my presentation, where I sort of review, perhaps for the benefits of all of us, as to where the profit split would be the best method to apply. What is some guiding overarching principle for that? And let's start with the place of the profit split method amongst all the available methods of transfer pricing. And on this slide, I put 5 methods, traditional transactional methods, as well as the 2 transactional profit methods, even though we should always remember that unspecified method is also available to the taxpayers. So that would be the 6th method. And I think we all remember that the guiding principle for choice of any transfer pricing method is the reliability of this method to determine the arm's length price. And then we have to guide us in selection of the method, we have different comparability factors that are listed on this slide. Again, so the comparability factors have different importance for application of different methods, as you know, so such as characteristics of property and service would be the most important for selection of the CAP method. And contractual terms would be important for maybe selection of other traditional transactional methods, but it also doesn't mean that the contractual terms are not important for transactional profit methods. So all of this comparability factors are important in different ways for each of the transfer pricing methods. Again, so this slide here, I guess, summarizes the overall OECD guidance on the application on selection of the profit split as the best method. So the most controlling factor is that several control parties provide unique and valuable contributions to control transaction. And what is the unique and valuable contribution? Well, in my opinion, it's something that we cannot benchmark. So it is something that is truly unique to the group that we are analyzing. The value is perhaps could be relative, as we will discuss later, or it could be absolute. So, but the company does not necessarily have to be a market leader for entities within the group to provide valuable contributions. The valuable contributions can still be provided on a relative basis within a given control transaction. So I guess the combination of this unique and valuable is what particularly we have to keep in mind. Then control parties jointly assume economically significant risks. This is also an important factor. Again, sometimes these risks are assumed on an ongoing basis. In some other instances, this one party provides, let's say, an intangible to another, and another exploits and enhances the intangible. These situations can also happen. They may lead to profit split, but not always. So then, yeah, about the remuneration of control parties, when it cannot be reliably benchmarked, well, sometimes people mean different things for that. What does it mean that we do not have very good comparables? Well, and sometimes people refer to by this is that I don't have the comparables for my specific region, or I don't have the comparables for the specific industry. Well, in my view, the factors like this are not necessarily the driving factors that would prompt somebody to reject benchmarking analysis, because at NIAR at least, we devised the methods to adjust for differences in geographical location and differences sometimes between the economic conditions of the years when certain economic downturns happened versus the comparables that are observed in good economic times. So those adjustments are out there, and they should not be sort of disregarded when we attempt to do the benchmarking analysis. Now, when
before we go to the next slide, maybe I would like to ask you one question, because you just defined what a valuable transaction is as absence of comparables, right? So it's a unique and valuable. But do you think that, for example, those are synonyms, that you have lack of comparables and then it is an automatically available transaction for the business, and vice versa? For example, if you have a transaction that has comparables, is it automatically should be classified as a routine transaction and, let's say, not valuable? Because we see it quite often in practice that if there are some data, comparability data, and that's considered automatically routine, and routine automatically as non-value contributing and maybe cost plus type of activity.
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, there is really no one right answer to this, I don't think. So certainly the very arm's length principle compels us to always look at comparable uncontrolled transactions. So then the question becomes how good is the comparability of the transaction that we can identify, right? So if we have comparables in the same industry that are, very similar in functions and risks, then I think that it would still be applicable to say that we can benchmark our the functions or the profits aligned with the functions performed, the risk controlled in a control transaction. Now, it's rarely is the case, however, I mean, maybe it's not always the case that we have this perfect comparability. And so I hope this answers the question, but we can maybe get to more of that. But so yeah, I mean, in other words, the profit split, in my view, will have to really be applied when we have certain uniqueness, so that and it's not necessarily associated with higher profitability of the industry. So the industry may be relatively average profitability, but still employ its own unique and valuable intangibles. We may think of, for example, the retail industry, because not all the companies in retail business are high profitable, and yet many of them maintain their strong brand recognition. They employ the intangibles to keep marketing their brand. They are very good in employing all the digital technologies available and AI tools and very advanced logistics and so forth. So there's definitely unique, probably in many ways, those intangibles are unique to the business and they are valuable to the business. Does not necessarily mean that they generate high profits. I don't know if it answers your question, Svitlana. But...
Yes, it does, because this is very interesting that we don't have to sometimes just to consider that some functions are subject to profit split, that it's automatically huge returns just allocated to these functions. And those, I think, was several times underlined in many court cases that just try to highlight that the routine is not equal, for example, that it's a limited level of return. And if a transaction is excluded from the profit split, it just probably just means that there are comparable transactions that a transaction can be benchmarked, but it's not that it's a routine and non-valuable transaction to the business.
Absolutely. to me, the routine means benchmarkable. I would use it in that sense. And often we also should examine our comparables, I think, to see what other intangibles do they employ, because yes, as you mentioned, routine in many people's minds is associated with something that does not embody any intangibles. At least this is what comes out often in residual profit split analysis. But the comparables that we select for comparability in the US, at least, they are almost always the publicly traded companies, which tend to be larger companies. And for sure, these companies employ intangibles, even though they may not be, let's say, unique, but for sure they have the full value chain about them. And we should really carefully approach as to what our benchmarking data tells us, what profits are we capturing within our benchmarks. So there may be already routine distribution activities embedded there. There may be routine marketing intangibles embedded there. So, and all that means that what we carve out of the total profit in the value chain already captures some of this routine intangibles contribution. And this actually probably leads nicely to the question of what does the accurate delineation of the control transaction means. We know that these words appear many times in the OECD transfer pricing guidelines. Not sure I've seen any sort of formal written guidance on this. So I guess what I'm going to share is sort of what we do at NIERA as a group typically. And so, well, first of all, to begin with, the word delineation means drawing the boundaries. And where we want to start with that we define the boundaries of the control transaction. And how do we do this? Well, we can start with the ending point of the transaction usually. So that's a good place to go. So for instance, by the destination market. So we could, the market of interest may be a particular country and sales of all the products in a particular country or the particular market. And from that point, we need to walk back in the value chain and see which entities of the M&E provided contributions to the sales in a given market. So in a full-fledged group, there would be manufacturing activities, there would be R&D activities, perhaps performed in different entities, different affiliates. There would be contributions such as supporting functions, management activities, and so forth. There would be potentially centralized procurement, centralized logistics, and so forth. And all this would be the part of the relevant value chain with a given destination market. But it doesn't have to be only that. So we could define a transaction in a different way, like, for example, application of a specific intangible. And I'm thinking more about a patent, for example, for a pharmaceutical product, or maybe a trademark. So in the case of a patent, it could be a pharmaceutical product that is sold in many countries, and but it's only one of the patents that the pharmaceutical company owns. So again, we have to define what were the value contributions for sales of the drugs under that patent. Again, walking through the similar value chain. Sometimes the types of risks jointly assumed would be a good way to start. And what first comes to mind is something like global trading, where several related parties would contribute their know-how and capital to execute trades for specific types of assets and so forth.
Forgive me, maybe my skepticism with value chain analysis. I think I've spent lots of time with it, also potentially writing my PhD on this, and I would say after 4 years, it's very difficult to understand how exactly you should perform it and what exactly it would mean, with all those factors that you should take into account. And with respect, for example, your example of intangibles, we also have a question in the chat. asking whether a racing matrix-based scoring approach is somehow a feasible and reliable approach for valuing the DEMPI contributions or DEMPI functions, right? So whether external factors somehow contribute to understanding of the pricing transactions. For example, if you have market characteristics in one market, company operates in very competitive conditions. In other jurisdiction, a company operates in, let's say, monopoly position. Should this also be taken into account in the value chain analysis? And if yes, the critical question is how?
Well, very good. I can only express my opinion on this, and I hope it's all clear. It's not the opinion of NERA or anyone else at NERA. So, well, starting maybe with the matrix that sort of assigns the values to DEMPI contributions. I think it does have its place. Now, it should not replace this overall value chain analysis, I think, and I will talk more about what value chain analysis we sort of do commonly. So again, the matrix could indicate the relative value contributions within a given organization, but it is all sort of, at this point, if we just limit ourselves with that, it's all inwardly looking, right? So the arm's length principle asks us to look at market transactions out there. So it means after we define, let's say, the internal value contributions, we should look outside and to see which of these can be benchmarked, or in other words, which of these maybe could be outsourced. So that's another way to think. Which of these are not the core activities to organization, or perhaps, you know, which stuff is sort of less key, which stuff perhaps could be outsourceable, you know. So and hopefully that will guide our understanding of the entire value contributions. And so in the value chain analysis, yes, we need to look at all the entities involved, as I described earlier. Start with the boundaries of the transaction, identify all the legal entities involved, but also it's critically important to identify their contributions, because, for example, we may have an entity in the value chain that performs manufacturing activities, R&D activities, administrative guidance, and so forth, but it only contributes administrative activities to the given value chain, and manufacturing and R&D will not be relevant. So again, we should only take a portion of the value contribution of that entity and string it on the value chain. I think we have some charts later on to show that. So then, of course, we perform the functional analysis on each relevant entity, yes, but the functional analysis in the traditional sense is just looking at one specific entity in isolation. In the value chain, we're trying to combine different entities into the defined transaction, either by market or either by specific intangible and so forth. And then, yes, should the external factors be considered? I would say yes, absolutely, they should be. So about the market characteristics and competition, I think those are similar factors. So the markets could be either competitive, as Svitlana pointed out, or not competitive. And so in the competitive markets, I think commonly we observe low profitability of every participant. And as my sort of earlier example of a retailer indicated, so many retailers are not very high profitable entities, but it doesn't mean that they don't employ valuable intangibles. In fact, we know that the large groups out there use very advanced technology, very advanced analytics of the data. So there are valuable contributions within those, you know, competitive industries could be found. In the market that is sort of insulated from the competition, there may be, it's likely that we find valuable contributions, but there also may be cases when we don't find particularly valuable contributions. We need to, again, start with examining what factors drive this lack of competition in the market. And for instance, we may find that it's government regulations that limit the competition. There's some sort of a natural monopoly, perhaps. And in that case, let's take an extreme example. there's only one, for instance, telecom provider now for landline or maybe cable television in the country. So it's made monopoly because of the government regulation. But so it doesn't mean necessarily that this group has a valuable and unique activities in its own.
And what would it mean? Would it mean that you attribute the most of the profits to the entity which is located in the jurisdiction, the government of which actually enabled that monopoly condition? Or maybe the most valuable activities of this entity are actually located abroad, but it's not the reason why this profit is so high?
Yeah, and this is a question about more of a market rent, I would say, right? And that's it's also addressed in OECD to some extent. So if the situation is such that the particular extra profit arises purely because of the local market condition and lack of competition, then we have to examine some other questions before we allocate this profit. First of all, which legal entity or employees of which entity secured access to these rents? So is this only doing of the local employees, or is this the entity outside of the local country? So if it's the local employees who secured the access to the rents, then it's probably very likely that this rent should stay in the country. And if it isn't though, so then this again value contribution was provided from the outside, then we will allocate that rent to the entity that was able to secure the extra rent.
And maybe last question from my side, but I found this very interesting, that external factors should be taken into account, and how exactly, because there is very limited guidance on that. So let's say we had an energy crisis recently, and so that led to very high prices on the energy resources and also windfall profits. The same we observed during the COVID-19 period, that the technological companies also reported a very high profitability just because of the COVID-19. So which triggered that, and potentially it's not a very valuable function that actually led to this profit, although it could be disputable as well. But let's say in the case of energy crisis, should the profits be allocated then to people, or in my example, for example, to the energy source, let's say oil mines, something, so where it is located?
Yeah, we had to deal with these questions more than once in the industries of the clients that we serve. The business cycles are prominent, and there would, from time to time, there are economic disruptions. And we learned that there are probably two sources of these disruptions that you will. So one would be perhaps internal to the company. This happens, when there would be a disaster with the product launch or product quality or the execution. So in that case, the losses are sort of, caused by the internal factors. And in the cases like this, I would say that the consequence of the losses should be attributed to the entity that was responsible for that. And the other set of factors would be something that the firm overall cannot control. Remember that we're always thinking about risk control here. So the economic calamities are usually not avoidable and not controllable by anyone within the M&E group. And if that's the case, then we took position and successfully defended that it's not just even the non-routine contributors, but also routine contributors that should take the portion of the losses. And we can observe this also from our market evidence. So if our comparables also experienced losses due to the same economic condition, then I think it's reasonable that we also have our routine returns that are either negative or very low, as well as assigning losses to valuable contributions as well. And the same goes to extraordinary profits, I would say, as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. now, let's see. So let's say we passed the stage of delineating the transaction and conducting the value chain analysis. Again, we will come back to it, and please provide us more questions if you have any particular ones on that. So what do we do next? So like I said, we have to aggregate the profit from each relevant entity and make sure that we only add in the relevant profit to the pool. So if that entity provides only administrative support, we should add this part of the profit, not the entire profit of the entity, for instance. So we need to aggregate all the profits of the entities that are involved in the value chain, and then decide whether we apply the overall profit split or the residual profit split. Well, when would we apply the overall profit split? It usually is in the case when we have uncontrolled transaction that is very similar to our controlled transaction that gives us the guidance on how the overall profit is split. Again, it's not a very common situation, but they may exist, they may be found. In typical scenario, though, with the residual profit split, because in the residual profit split, we can benchmark and carve out the contributions that we consider routine, or again, routine is the same as benchmarkable. It doesn't have anything to do with how high the profit is. So, and then we are left with the residual profit. And the next question is, how do we split this pool of the residual profit amongst the relevant entities that contribute the value? And yeah, also here, I put the treatment of losses, but we already discussed that before. So then if you don't mind, I can go here. Next step would be to select the profit split factors after we isolated the pool of the residual profit. So again, there is some guidance on what potential profit split factors could be applicable, but not, it's very thin sort of guidance on that. So in practice, what we've seen, these factors that are here on the screen are most typically applied. So it's either the expenses for intangible development or capital invested in intangible development, and I will talk more about that. Sometimes it's headcount of employees or salaries of employees, or rather total compensation of the employees, and sometimes surveys are also applicable. Why would we use something like capital instead of expenses, right? So the capital allows, what does it mean? So the capital means that we will capitalize the expenses on intangible development activities, accounting for the different timing of these investments and maybe the lag before these investments mature into an intangible, and also account for the useful life of the intangible. So in fact, each annual expense then becomes, sort of an input into the capitalized calculation that we can do. And that allows to avoid the problem of timing mismatch when some intangibles take longer time to develop than others. So particularly, the mismatch between the marketing expenses and R&D expenses often comes to mind. They have markedly different time to develop and time, useful life as well. So then there's also an opportunity cost if someone invests into an intangible that takes a long term to mature, for example, the drug development particularly. So the capitalized expenses for intangibles development have their place, I think. For the headcount or compensation, certain business models lend themselves easy to that. So, for instance, the professional services that most of us are in, these professional services are driven directly by the employees, and there's a very good relationship, I guess, between the headcount or the compensation and the value of services being provided. well, we also use the surveys in a few instances, and one valuable difference that surveys can make is that they're done from a perspective of either the external consumers for consumer products, or even for the B2B products, the surveys can be done from the by asking employees of the company or the industry experts as to what are the more valuable features of a particular product. And in that case, we simply zero in on the most value added. So it may be that there are only few features of the product that really differentiated from the competitors, and then we can only focus on this as the value contribution.
Vladimir, do you see any differences in the acceptability of potential profit split factors between different jurisdictions? For example, whether headcount, salaries also are accepted, I don't know, in the United States, in Europe, what is the most preferable as well? Whether you use projected expenses or actual expenses, so basically whether you have to change from year to year, or like your base, or you have to you can use just projected expenses to set up a certain profit splitting ratio between different functions, as well as maybe regarding surveys, are they being challenged for their subjectivity? So have you observed that the tax authorities, for example, do not accept them and say, okay, I'm sorry, but I don't find it's a very persuasive analysis, the subjectivity, the value weight that is allocated to certain function?
Well, I mean, yes, so there are multiple questions here, but so I think that in terms of communicating with the tax authorities, there are probably just let's make a distinction between the settings that involve controversy, like audits, litigation, and so forth, and settings that are more cooperative. And so in the cooperative settings, let's start there, such as APAs. So the particularities of the method are discussed between the tax authorities involved and the taxpayer, and we do find that the taxpayer or the tax authorities rather will get amenable to the method if they understand what's been done. So again, and the choice comes, for example, applying the capitalized expenses. It's typically when it's the more reliable method than applying expenses as such, and it could be more reliable if we have a significant mismatch in timing or significant timing of development. In other instances, the costs may be just as good of a proxy as any. Now, regarding to controversy, well, there's by definition, there would be a challenge to the method that the taxpayer selects. And the key for the taxpayer is to prove that this method was reliable and the best choice under the circumstances and applied in the most objective way possible. I mean, for sure that as professionals helping the taxpayers, we have to be objective, but at the same time, we use the professional judgment, and we always should use this sound judgment. The other very important factor is to provide the documentation of the reasoning, and on the contemporaneous basis, which is also very important because the tax audits, as we all know, come several years after the fact, and the contemporaneous facts is what typically wins the day. So the taxpayers could operate under the different set of expectations several years ago when this transaction was planned, and then the actual plane of the facts could be different. So to avoid the facts that the hindsight dominates the selection of the method up front, we need to be ready with the ex-ante analysis or upfront analysis to lay out all the facts and thinking that would make the given method the best choice.
I think I was not alone because we got, I think, 3 questions of the same: how to make surveys reliable, right? And how to make, yes, so because they could be subject to subjectivity, sorry for tautology, and then there could be also that business people might not understand the questions, have different view on the questions, number of inputs can be low, and data might be not reliable. So whether it's indeed kind of something as a best practice now, or that should be something left in the past.
Well, I mean, certainly surveys as a technique are recognized by the courts in the US, at least. NIR has quite solid practice based on the survey analysis. So typically, the surveys are conducted for consumer products, and most often they're used to indeed assert the value of a particular product feature or a trademark. So it is a legitimate technique. Now, in transfer pricing setting, this may be a new method, and yes, I mean, so it's best to use the professional in-survey techniques to design objective analysis. So this analysis can be shown to be objective and unbiased with the even statistical techniques, and each surveys are processed under certain statistic tools as well. So it is different maybe if the surveys are administered internally, for example, that might reduce reliability. I don't know, but so it's just a tool. It's one of the tools, and I'm not saying that would be the only method to use, but it's something definitely to keep in mind.
And maybe one more question from Mr. Denaro, and he asked whether you mentioned that it's possible to apply the profit split method in multilateral context, so not just to a transaction by transaction way, but to several entities. So the question is whether we are not moving away from the traditional transaction by transaction approach and actual delineation of a transaction, and if not, how then to apply the profit split method between multiple parties?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, certainly that's one of the big questions in transfer pricing. What is the transaction? And so I think implicitly sort of transaction delineation assumes that we aggregate multiple transactions, because if we really are going down to the micro level, we will be swamped in analysis of millions of transactions. If we're looking at every given SKU as a transaction, that's that would be an overwhelming amount of work. So in accurate delineation of transaction, I understand that OECD means transaction of like products or services that exhibit similar features, and also in which the parties take similar risks and perform similar functions. So a certain aggregation is implied there. And if multiple entities contribute into this transaction, we definitely need to split profits among the multiple entities.
I also have one question regarding the previous slide. So how to deal with PPP? Are engineers in the US more valuable than probably in the other country? Means looking at cost will increase profits in the US.
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't think I mentioned the US anywhere, but okay. So let's deal with the PPP adjustment indeed. So let's, imagine we have two, let's say two regions of the world that develop valuable intangibles. One region is a low-cost country with the low compensation of employees across the board, and the other would be the high-cost country or a region. And what do we do in that situation? Well, again, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. I've been working on a client when the employees of a low-cost affiliate have developed the IP that was part of a global product sold globally at the price that is determined by the global market. So there is that question of, again, the market rent being available. Now, in most situations, the market rents don't last too long. So it could be the first mover advantage. So this market rents could gradually whittle away. So we can think of that as, for instance, entry into developing countries by the industries that provided, the call answering services first, and then IT services and more value adding. But because many competitors in the business went into the same market, this location rents arguably all were competed away through the pricing of the product, final product in the market. So to the extent the market trends exist, we've already discussed that we need to take a second question into account as to who was responsible for securing this market rents. So in many cases, that would be the local entity, especially in the cases when the local entity is acquired with the ongoing, business, going concern, and already the local entity has a market presence and has its own sort of a valuable contribution to the value chain. It would be rare if a new greenfield affiliate is set up by the M&E in a low-cost country that affiliate would be responsible for local market development. In my view, I think it would be rare. But in the case when a local entity has been acquired with ongoing business concern, it would be feasible for that entity to contribute into capturing the local market rent.
Vladimir, I also had a recent a project with local adjustments for the costs. And the question that I would have is that, so the question from the audience suggests that the cost probably will drive higher returns, right? So the more salary a person gets in the United States, potentially that the cost, I don't know, somewhere in Slovakia, the salary would be a bit lower than the United States. And would it be fair to allocate, let's say, different part of the profits, or there will be necessary to make any adjustments? And then what I thought is that the money you get, for example, in Slovakia, taking into account the Slovakian market, is also different from what you get in the United States, and then for how much you can buy for the same money. So shouldn't we think about the profit split not in nominal profit, but potentially as the same ratio for equally valuable functions on the cost? Understandable that the cost in a high-cost country will be higher, but probably then in the returns that we expect should be also higher.
Yeah, no, I understand this. What's behind this question is that if we account contributions based on costs, then in the R&D costs, let's say the majority of that is the compensation. And of course, the countries with the higher labor cost will have more of the R&D expenses just because of this factor. But again, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. So this is where there's a case for looking at the contributions of the employees and looking at headcount and the functions of each team. So, and if the teams, let's say, are equally valuable or even more valuable in the low-cost country, then there's definitely a case for perhaps using a headcount in that case, right? Or should we use the headcount of only the higher level employees? That's also a possibility. So the employees that really sort of manage and control outcomes, yes, that's a possibility. So this is a very fact-specific question, but at the same time, when it would not be the case, is that if majority of the industry players also are operating in this low-cost country and are also capturing this location rents internally, and then so if the industry is reasonably competitive, so that the choice between different industry players is not very constrained, so that essentially then the market price will itself eat out all this market advantage, I would say. So it will be a necessity to operate in a low-cost country just to stay in business. And in that case, I don't think there's that additional returns that could be assigned to the country of lower compensation, if that makes sense. So let's think about something like the, perhaps, the telecom or the customer support industry. It used to be a very big business advantage to be located in a low-cost country, and I think now it's a necessity. We don't necessarily pay premium for that.
Okay, I think we had lots of other topics to cover, but indeed we have only 10 minutes left. So you may choose which topic you would like to cover in those 10 minutes additional.
All right. So, well, perhaps let me just illustrate very briefly how in our on practice at NEAR we do the value chain analysis. We disaggregate the full value chain that was proposed by Michael Porter into something that is first vertical column like this that reflects the transaction, delineated transaction, and all the contributions into it. And then also we assign the profitability to different parts of this value chain, be that functional or entrepreneurial. And then we disaggregate them by each location. So that means that we can actually add the transactions across the affiliates, and this provides probably much better graphical representation of the value chain in our view. So that helps to analyze different transactions. And may skip this case, which shows a pharmaceutical company, but just briefly that you can reflect lots of different stages of R&D in such a way. So for instance, there are different phases of R&D that occur in pharmaceutical. You can reflect outside third-party contributions like clinical trials that are often conducted by unrelated parties and so forth. But we will skip to this, and maybe another interesting topic would be how do we deal with the group synergies? And why is it a relevant topic? Well, I think intuitively all of us know that M&Es normally generate the group synergies in most cases. An interesting question I thought was asked by Robert Coase back in 1937 in his publication. He asked himself a question: why do firms have employees in the first place? Why couldn't an entrepreneur contract everything out? All the service that they need, they could contract out potentially. And so the answer is that if you have some in-house employees, then you minimize transaction costs related to the contracts, bargaining, and so forth. And you have you minimized also the cost of enforcement because you have better monitoring and protection of trade secrets and so forth. So this is the reason for the firms to aggregate themselves. And then you can think about why the firms grow. They also grow for the same reasons. So they can take advantage of the economies of scale, economies of scope. When they are large enough, they can realize financial synergies and manage and allocating capital. Then many firms develop internal know-how that is very unique to them, and it's not publicly available, and it's valuable for executing the business. And of course, they can also and do contribute into joint creation of intangibles that are valuable and unique. And so all that, I guess, points out to the fact that the synergies are the source of value within the M&Es. On one hand, if we think of the DEMPI as a concept, this is also, a concept that is responsible for the value creation. So in fact, there is a relation between DEMPI functions and group synergies. It's probably not the perfect 100% overlap, but there is certainly an overlap here. And how does effective synergy relate to transfer pricing? Well, first of all, the OECD guidelines mention synergies in one instance. There are several paragraphs that mention these group synergies. It's section 1, paragraph 182, but it's very brief, and I don't think OECD makes connection between DEMPI and group synergies. But let's think about what happens if we have significant group synergies. So when we use the one-sided methods like TNMM, the good comparables that we think of them would be the comparable that is a standalone and it operates as a standalone company. So those companies would tend to be small. So if we derive the profits of this company, it usually would be profits smaller than we would expect from a part of a M&E group operating with the synergy level, because if a group affiliate has synergies, we would expect it to have either greater revenues or lower costs or both. And as a consequence, the synergy provides a group affiliate, let's think of distribution, for example, the way to earn higher return. At the same time, when we benchmark the distribution against one isolated, self-standing distribution entity, the profit of that distribution entity may be lower. So when we apply the lower return to our group affiliate, what we do effectively is we undervalue the contribution of the routine affiliates. Again, I'm not saying this is going to be observed in every analysis, but it may be a fact to keep in mind. So in the presence of synergies, we may be undervaluing the contribution of the routine affiliates if we use one-sided method. And what can we do about this is that one concept we can apply is the Shapley value. Shapley value is it comes from the game theory. It's developed by Lloyd Shapley, also back in about 1950s. So this theory by Shapley assumes that different players behave cooperatively, and that's in contrast to the Nash equilibrium, which assumes the competitive behavior. So in Shapley theory, the players stand to gain from cooperating with one another, and so this gain is what we call the synergy. And so that surplus then is shared by the players in proportion of their contributions. And that comes directly from the mathematical analysis that Shapley derived. And we think that this idea aligns very well with the transfer pricing as well. So we're looking at just the value added by different players by joining the coalition. And again, some players may contribute zero as well. So in that case, there is no synergies, but that would be something we might also observe in groups when we have entity with, let's say, no functions, something or a cash box, that contribution of entity would be zero, and it would consequently share zero surplus. So I don't know how much more time do we have, but I think that the Shapley value could potentially deserve a whole different lecture. All I'm just to say now is that it's a useful concept to think in the cases when there is, for example, presence of synergies. Also, when the intangibles are not that evident, but overall value chain analysis points out to valuable contributions. It's just difficult to measure those contributions reliably, so we may not have identifiable intangibles, but it's more about the know-how that different parts of the group contribute. And finally, it's also useful in situations like mutual agreement proceedings or even APAs, when different tax authorities need to look at the case and assess the possibilities of what outcomes can be achieved under different, maybe different view of the transaction or different tweaking of the assumptions and so forth. So the Shapley value application tends to provide tight ranges for profitability of the different group members. So it's a concept that tends to be centered on outcomes, and sometimes it could be useful in negotiations.
Thank you so much. And in the sake of time, unfortunately, we should stop to on this interesting note. And then indeed, Shapley value would probably deserve a separate webinar just to discuss this concept. And the thing that we didn't cover everything what we thought could be interesting about the profit split just proves how important the topic is and how interesting and challenging it can be, how much guidance is also additional guidance is needed potentially from the international organization side, from the European Commission, maybe when they develop a transfer pricing directive, what also additional things that have to be taken into account. And also the answering the questions in the Q&A session, the presentation will be shared. So you can also follow everything what we've discussed today and what the examples that we didn't have time to address. And thank you so much, Vladimir, again for joining this session and for being a guest expert of our webinar series. And then thank you to the audience also for being together with us today. And we will also have, as I mentioned at the beginning, for those who maybe were a bit late, then we'll have the second and third webinar. The second will be on the financial transactions and the insurance industry in specific. What are the particularities of the application of the profit split method? And the third webinar will be on the factors driving a change currently in the application and the use of the profit split method. So thanks again, and have a good day, evening, wherever you are now.
It's always my pleasure, and thank you, Svitlana, and all the participants as well.